The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. John Stuart Mill wrote that, and I think it comes as close as anything in political thought to the fundamental rule a civilization should live by. If we are serious about freedom, then that principle has to be the starting point. Not as one value among many, but as the boundary that decides when power is legitimate and when it becomes domination. Mill understood something most systems still resist. The purpose of a civilized order is not to manage people. It is to protect their ability to direct their own lives unless their actions cause real harm to someone else. That has to be stated clearly because societies are always tempted to cheat. Power likes to justify itself in the language of order, stability, efficiency, morality, and public good. But once power no longer has to prove that it is preventing actual harm, it will always find reasons to intrude. It will enforce conformity, discipline difference, and call that civilization. Within an Enlightenment socialist framework, the harm principle becomes more than a limit. It becomes the moral foundation of a humane society. It says a human being is not property, not a subject waiting to be managed, and not raw material for institutions to shape for their own purposes. A human being is sovereign by default. That sovereignty does not depend on wealth, permission, or approval. It is the condition from which any just order has to begin. That is what I mean by yes and less harm. You do not need permission to live, to create, to transform, or to become. The default answer is yes. The only legitimate limiting condition is harm. But harm cannot mean whatever offends the majority or unsettles authority. It cannot mean the powerful feeling threatened by someone else's freedom. If harm is defined that loosely, the principle means nothing. Harm has to mean something specific. It has to involve a real violation of another person's safety, sovereignty, or capacity to flourish. That is the line. The point is not to create a world where nobody is challenged or disturbed. The point is to create a world where one person's freedom does not become another person's domination. That is why yes and less harm is not anarchy and not permissiveness. It is a serious account of liberty grounded in mutual moral standing. This is where the harm principle connects to eudaimonia. In Aristotle's terms, the purpose of a society is not just survival or order. It is to create the conditions in which human beings can flourish. Flourishing is more than comfort. It means the full development of human capacities in a world structured to make that possible. A decent society does not merely keep people alive. It gives them room to think, build, love, create, and grow without unnecessary subordination. That kind of flourishing requires institutions that default toward trust and consent rather than suspicion and prior restraint. So, this is not just a rule for courts or legislatures. It is a design principle for civilization itself. You can see it in infrastructure. A sidewalk says yes because it lets people move freely without special permission. A police state says no because it treats ordinary movement as something to monitor and control. A decentralized solar grid says yes because it expands local autonomy. A fossil fuel monopoly says no because it turns a basic condition of life into centralized dependence. A gender-affirming healthcare clinic says yes because it respects a person's authority over their own body. A gatekeeping bureaucracy says no because it assumes legitimacy begins at administrative approval instead of the person living the life. That is why the harm principle is not just a restraint on power. It is a design specification for liberation. It tells us how to build a world where freedom is the default condition of social life rather than a rare exception granted after scrutiny. And when harm exists, power may intervene, but even then, the purpose matters. The point is protection, not domination. The point is to defend the conditions under which many good lives can emerge, not to dictate the content of a good life from above. That is the difference between a free society and a paternal one. This is where Enlightenment socialism becomes concrete. The promise is not just formal liberty under conditions of desperation. It is a world where coercion is reduced politically and economically, where scarcity is no longer manufactured to preserve hierarchy, and where power is bounded instead of hoarded. The test of a society is not how often it talks about freedom. It is how often people encounter a real yes in the structure of ordinary life, and how rarely that yes is withdrawn without good reason. If power is only justified when it prevents harm, then every law, institution, and system should be judged by a simple question. Does it protect flourishing or does it suppress it? That is what it means to finish the Enlightenment. It means building a world where liberty is not a gift from above, but the starting point of a moral life. It means making freedom real enough, legal enough, and material enough that no future tyrant can bury it under procedure, fear, or force. That is what it means to live free. If this work is worth $2 or $4 to you, my Patreon is a tip jar. It helps me build a floor so I can keep doing this work.